Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. We have another episode of Built by Women. I'm so happy you can join me. I'm Michelle Hayward, founder of Positive Hire, where we connect Black, Latina, and Indigenous women who are experienced scientists, engineers, and technology professionals to management roles. If you are joining us for this special series of discussions about women in the United States who are Black, Latina, and Native slash Indigenous who build the U.S. infrastructure, design it, or operate it. Welcome, welcome. We've had a fantastic list of guests over the last 2 to 3 months. As we wind down this series, I highly encourage you to head over to our YouTube channel and the Positive Hire website to catch all of the great women we've had to join us over there. Now, what I would also like to encourage you to do is to be sure that you check in with us as we roll out more and more content and discussions around women are marginalized or underrepresented women in STEM. We also have conversations around career development for those of you in mid-career, mid-management. We'll be switching over in the month of September to LinkedIn audio events. So you'll still be joining me here on Wednesdays, but we will be inviting you to the stage to have more discussions. Today, what I'm talking about is focus on, we're going to be talking about from the glass cliff to the bridge, crafting a roadmap to sustainable diversity, equity, inclusion in the engineering construction industry. What some of you may not know is that I'm a civil engineer. I built the power grid literally on the ground for over a decade. And I talk about my experiences and share the experiences of other women who have worked as engineers, data professionals, scientists, technologists, and the things that really need to change in the culture of government, nonprofit, for-profit, and not-for-profit organizations to retain us. And we often, when we talk about what goes on in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, oftentimes it is thought of as an early career issue or just an education issue. It is truly from education to actually having a career in STEM that we encounter various barriers. And today I'm talking about glass cliff, and I'll explain what the glass cliff is and then what the bridge is, and we'll go from there. But the glass cliff really showed up during the pandemic. And so the glass cliff is often described as a phenomenon. And I don't know if it's a phenomenon, but what I will say, corporate cultures of organizations, not just corporations, oftentimes are not willing and accepting to women or Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. What happens is during tough economic times or times of difficulty like a pandemic or a recession, more women and marginalized and underrepresented people are offered opportunities to become leaders in organizations. And you're like, well, that's kind of good and bad, right? Exactly. It's kind of good and bad. What happens is white men no longer want those roles because they see how difficult it can be to be successful when you're in a really tumultuous type of situation. The organization may be performing poorly. It may have high turnover, maybe losing customers, bad publicity. There are different things that could be going in the organization that can make it more challenging to be successful. But women and Black and other people of color, Black, Indigenous, Hispanic, Latino, oftentimes will get these opportunities and must decide if they will accept it and the risk, because this is the only time they may be offered such a high level position. And you're like, that's really rough. That's a really hard decision. And so what happens is they have a higher risk of failure. Also, in there, they may not have the same access to people and other resources they need to be successful. And some of you may think, well, it's a recession, it's a downturn. You would be surprised what resources are, how people literally set others up for failure on the glass cliff, right? So we talk about oftentimes the glass ceiling, but once you get past the glass ceiling, you're walking on it, and it can be a cliff for you to go off. So how do we create transition really glass cliff opportunities to, and I rephrase that from phenomena to trying to make them the glass cliff, make it an opportunity for women and other marginalized people of color to be successful in the role. And so that's why I have the bridge. The bridge really symbolizes, for the one thing, we're talking about infrastructure. And as a civil engineer, like, I love the bridge, right? But it really symbolizes the proactive strategy aimed at creating a sustainable and inclusive environment that supports underrepresented individuals in leadership roles, right? So let's say that again. It is a proactive strategy. So organizations may have seen, and we've seen this, we've read reports the last couple of years, how more and more women are leaving leadership and executive roles in organizations, C-suite roles in organizations. Have you been proactive? And I'm talking to the white male leaders in the organization. Have you been proactive in switching those positions these women were on, if they already gone, from glass cliff roles, and bridging them by creating a proactive strategy aimed at creating a sustainable and inclusive environment? This environment has to support these individuals, underrepresented and women, in their leadership roles. It serves as more of a metaphoric, when I say bridge, it's more metaphoric pathway to overcoming the challenges. And so the challenges live in the trough, and the bridge goes across that. And so when we think about what it takes to build a bridge, you're always going to have to dig deep and start building with a foundation, right? And so in order to dig and place in foundation, you're going to need people, resources, blueprints, right? It's coming from an engineer. Trust me. You're going to need people, equipment, other resources like money, time, training, to dig and build a foundation so that you can build that bridge from the glass cliff to an environment that is sustainable for these people to be retained at leadership levels. The foundation, really, when we look at it in a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens, is number one, awareness, number two, understanding, and number three, action. So the organizational leaders have to be aware there's an issue when they see this certain categories or demographics of people leaving the organization or not succeeding as a level as others in the organization. They need to understand that things must change in order for these people to succeed. These people meaning marginalized, underrepresented women in leadership roles. And lastly, they must take action to make this bridge happen. So your awareness and understanding is necessary, but your action and the proper action is actually going to be critical. So to create this bridge, it involves implementing various measures to address the systemic barriers that lead to the glass cliff phenomenon. Several barriers, okay? So if you have seen somebody on a glass cliff roll, a woman of color, a person of color, let me know in the chat how that showed up for you. what did it, what showed up for you? What did it look like? What was their experience? What was going on in the environment for you to, now that you know what the glass flip is, like, oh, is that why they quit? Is that why they're hush hush about why the person isn't here anymore? So really think about what that looks like in your organization. Now, next, I want to go to reasons for the glass cliff as it pertains to the engineering construction industry and solutions. So we don't have a lot of time, but we do have enough time to talk about this. So I'm going to go through three key areas, and I want to talk with tokenism in leadership positions. After the murder of George Floyd and the call for organizations to be more equitable for Black people, the call for government to be more equitable for Black people, and so many other entities to bring in equity for Black people, organizations decided, you know what, we're going to diversify and we're going to recruit more Black people. But you did no internal culture work. You caused, for many of you, I won't say all of, many of you, if not most of you, caused more harm than you did good. So the first thing that we saw with this diversity recruitment effort was tokenism and leadership roles. And so here you have underrepresented individuals who are often appointed to leadership roles during challenging times as symbolic gestures. See, we have a Black person, we have a person, another person of color, and we have a woman. See, we're diverse. And I pause there because I want you to think, well, you're like, but isn't that what we're supposed to do? If you looked at it from an equity lens, right? You want to promote authentic representation because you want to ensure that diverse leaders or leaders from underrepresented communities are selected based on their qualifications and not just for optics. And I often get pushback, oh, well, we have to lower our standards. And I often look, because I'll look in, especially in engineering orgs and tech is the worst, I would say, wherein the requirements for marginalized people, women, people of color, is much more stringent, right, than anybody else that has previously held that role or that is currently in a similar role. And there are always reasons why that person is there. Well, you don't really need a technical background. Then why are you giving me technical interview? Oh, well, we just want to see what you know. If it's not required for the position, why are you asking me questions about it? Or even changing the interviewing process. And so when oftentimes even the process to recruit talent and diversify your executive levels, your interviewing and vetting process is often biased. And oftentimes you're looking outside of the organization and you don't bother to look internal to the organization for talent. And there are people that have been there for 10, 15, 20 years that have been overlooked time and time again. And you're wondering why your executive level, your upper management levels are not diverse. It's because you do not have equitable practices, policies, and procedures in your organization. And those must change. When we work with organizations, we use the ISO standard for human resource management for diversity and inclusion is 30415, ISO 30415, because it truly looks at the organization overall and not just HR, not just supplier diversity, but truly understanding that to remove the glass cliff phenomenon, which I don't like the word phenomenon. I think it, because it's on purpose. It doesn't, oh, look at that phenomenon of a asteroid. That's the phenomenon, right? And so the approach has to be much more strategic. And remember, I talked about earlier that building a bridge is a proactive strategy. And so you must be more strategic when you're interviewing and hiring at leadership roles. So tokenism is not one of those things. Next is something I just brought up, which is lack of access to networks and opportunities. Because I said, hey, you didn't even look internally for talent to promote. You automatically went externally because oftentimes your practices, policies, and procedures are biased. You lack equity in them around access to networks, access to training, and opportunities. And so when we think about lack of access to networks and opportunities, underrepresented employees, BIPOC employees, women employees might not have the same access to mentorship and sponsorship networks. Some organizations have started creating formalized mentorship and sponsorship networks. Some organizations do not value them and think they matter, and they really do. Because when you show people you believe in them and you're willing to invest your time and your money, not just their paycheck, but additional resources, they are more likely to stay because they see that you see them and you're investing in them. All right. So what you need to look at is really implementing a formal mentorship program where it connects underrepresented and marginalized employees with senior leaders, and is really providing them guidance. And it's not just for the senior leaders, because they need to be trained too. Like, please go train them culturally and on how to mentor and be a sponsor. And then also providing guidance and exposure to growth opportunities. And so how do they have these meetings with their mentees or their, I don't want to say sponsorees, but people they're sponsoring? What do those meetings look like? How are you tracking success? How are you measuring success? What's the overall goal of providing mentors and sponsors to marginalized, underrepresented people in your organization? And it's really important that you take the time to really develop a mentorship program. So we often see the mentorship programs for early career. We focus here at Positive Hire on mid-career because people simply will not address the fact that they will have Black women, Latinas, and other women sitting in an organization for years, and they are consistently overlooked for promotions. Consistently. They are not provided additional training, but they're given plenty of work, right? And the equity is not in those processes. So I encourage you to really change that. So you want to implement a formal mentorship program, and really giving these employees access to opportunities for internal mobility. And so they're getting provided guidance and exposure to growth opportunities. So you really have to know what the employee's goals are, what their skill sets are, where they have gaps in their skill sets, and really how to have a map for their career within the organization. And oftentimes that is not what is happening. So please make some of these changes as well. All right. Whew. So if you're in the chat and this is resonating with you, let me know, because we're going on to the third and final topic, because I think it's really important. I don't think this particular one is talked about enough, but I mentioned it a tad bit earlier, and that's the lack of professional development opportunities. And the reason I bring this up is marginalized, underrepresented people, women have a limited access to skill building opportunities, which can hinder their career progression, right? Oh, well, you needed this training. And I always tell this story of how I lost a young Black man engineer license, meaning he had his professional engineer's license in a couple states, New Jersey and Pennsylvania at the time. And he was the only one in his team that he worked under a director for that was working on a transmission distribution project. He's a structural engineer, but he was doing project management work on a transmission distribution project. His team was getting training on transmission distribution. He hadn't been invited. So he went to his director and said, "Hey, I see you're doing this training. I want to attend." He was told no. He didn't need to go. He was the only one on his team of engineers that was actively on a transmission distribution project. It was the very first one he'd been on. He was not in the construction site with us. He was actually in the office. So I was literally coaching him and teaching him via the phone and going through drawings and other documents so he could learn faster, because there was nobody really in the office for him to talk to about the project, because we didn't do the engineering. It was done by other companies, and he was just getting the drawings, in a shared drive and trying to figure things out on his own and joining meetings. And it can really be a lot, even though you're already an engineer, because it's a different type of infrastructure, even from an energy perspective. And so he was highly upset, but he was also the only Black male engineer in that whole team. He ended up getting an opportunity because he was a licensed engineer who had worked in transmission distribution, and he resigned. So I lost my engineer, and his director came to him to ask him to stay with the company. And he told him, as he repeated to me, I told him he didn't have to say it. You don't have to say anything, is what he was saying to his director. When I asked you for training, you told me no, I didn't need it. So there's nothing else to talk about. They could not counter him because they did not invest in professional development when he needed it the most. And what it did was, and I understood what was happening to him as a Black woman in that same organization. I'd been there longer than him, what was going on and what was happening. And so when he said he was leaving, I completely understood. I congratulated him for stepping away and understanding that his opportunities in the organization were going to be limited, because it was going to be limited by not him not being a licensed engineer, but provided access to the trainings he really needed to grow and advance in his career. And I'm talking about somebody that had less than 10 years of experience in industry. And so when organizations say, we can't find young talent, do you deserve the talent? What are you doing to deserve the talent? And oftentimes you're not doing anything but maybe the bare minimum, which is offering a paycheck. And so when we think about lack of professional development opportunities, you have to start investing in ongoing professional development for all of your employees. They need to be aligned to their career goals and aspirations. So there needs to be career mapping consistently going on and documented. You need to be offering trainings and workshops consistently. And some of you are like, oh, we have a learning management system. Does the learning management system right now that you have with content and trainings in it, especially in infrastructure, does it address climate change? Does it address how you're going to need to train your people to design, build, and operate infrastructure during climate change? Many times, these organizations have not updated. They're not sure what to do around climate change, or they still think they have time. Good luck with that. And so you also need to be looking at what needs to be changed and updated and what are the goals and skills your internal talent on a whole needs, and also identifying the gaps, the larger gaps that marginalized people may have that you're going to have to go through and be more diligent about. Because the longer they've been in an organization, more than likely, the more gaps they have in skills and training that they're going to need to continue to build their career. Right. I absolutely agree. So I'm gonna do a recap. I see we have some comments come in. I don't know why my comments are coming in late, but they're coming in. So um, and so let's talk about tokenism. I'm gonna read this comment if you don't see it. So tokenism doesn't work if people don't allow themselves to be placed into positions that they are not qualified to fill. Absolutely. That is the other thing. I have seen some people take the opportunity they're not qualified for. And sometimes people take the opportunity because they're sold on, we will train you, and they don't get the training they need, or they have just enough to take the role and not fill it. So sometimes it's a double-edged sword. You're promised the training, but it never comes, right? And so I think we have to look at what does that look like and how do you set people up. So going back to training, making sure individuals have the right skill set to fill those roles and not making them a whole salad, a whole salad. So, and what I mean by whole salad is if somebody had to take your job, a role that you have for more than 5 years, and you compare it to what you do now in that role, no job title change, barely any salary increases, to what you applied for 5 years ago, what would it look like? I remember somebody asked me to write a job description. I started laughing. I said, what do you need the person to do? It's like, well, what you do? I said, no. What are they supposed to do in this role? Because I do a lot of other stuff. I was construction field personnel. So sometimes I was IT because the router went down and somebody needed to be on the phone, or we had older people and they had computer issues, and they're like, I unplugged and I rebooted, but it's not working. Like, let's take the battery out. And so it's oftentimes these other things that you do, especially even in large organizations, if you're field personnel. I think sometimes I did more HR stuff for new hires than other people knew, explaining per diem and travel benefits. I remember early on, it was like 2009, probably. Yeah, it had to be 2009. We were, it might have been, no, it was 9. It was 2009. One of our members employees on a project. This is a fossil fuel plant. And him and his wife had a baby, and he was talking about the hospital bill. Like, why are you paying the hospital bill? He's like, oh, well, I can't update insurance until this time of the year. I said, you should be covered. I said, you didn't call insurance? So he was paying this humongous health insurance bill because he didn't realize the insurance would kicked in for labor and delivery. And he called. I had him, I said, just go call our health insurance provider. And he did, and it was covered. And he was like, I thought I had to pay until I could get it. I was like, dude, when it was open, your wife wasn't pregnant. Or you didn't know she was pregnant. And so it's just things like that. Being in the field is additive work. How do you pitch a mentorship program? Okay, let's talk. How do you pitch a mentorship program to an org or manager already stretched thin? And do you have any recommendation or resource available to help build a mentorship program? Okay, cool. So the first question, how do you pitch a mentorship program to an organization where manager already stretched? So what I would say, I don't say, I'm laughing at another comment y'all don't see. Sell it as what's the benefit for the organization. Mentorship programs don't have to be just internal to your organization. So if you want to look at it like you could create one inside of or in partnership with another organization. One way you could look at it is there a professional organization or two that you could test pilot with. And so that could be an engineering organization, that could be an organization that focuses on underrepresented people to access people to be mentors. So if you already know your organization is stretched thin, figure out a different way. You're people wise, you're stretched thin. Figure out people wise another way to have access to mentors. Sometimes they may be retirees and they just want something to do. When I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, I'm gonna go back about 10 years. And there was what was the engineering society, Tulsa Engineering Society, I think it was TES. There would be older men that were retired and they would just show up, somebody said, an hour early for the meeting just so they could hang out and talk because they didn't have much to do. So sometimes you need to access either retirees, depending on how old the org is, that you could bring back to be mentors to younger people in the organization. And sometimes they may be partnering with another organization, but really think about how that would look and structure it differently, but also sell it as a benefit to the organization, because mentorship can help retain that talent a little bit earlier. Do you have resources? Hit me up on LinkedIn if we're connected, because it just says LinkedIn user, which is fine. DM me on LinkedIn. I need to know a couple things. What level in work are people? And so are you focused on early career, mid-career, or both? Also, is it non-technical and technical people, so engineers, tech, IT professionals, things like that? So it is going to vary on what that looks like. But take into account when you're talking about mentorship programs, it doesn't have to be weekly. It might be they meet monthly, but really how you want to look at it is you're going to have two components to it, right? You're going to need to have the mentor component and the mentee component, and so they mesh in the middle. So understanding why people want to be mentored and why people want to be a mentor. And both parties have to be trained. The mentors need more training than not, right? And then have a system wherein both of them are reporting. Like, what did you talk about in your conversation? What are your goals? At least the first 2 or 3 years, so you get a better idea of what the engagement is like. Some people, their mentor may only talk virtually on the phone or have lunch or something once a quarter, and that works for them. I remember I actually reached out to the man who became my sponsor. He was actually a VP in the organization. And I just reached like, yo, we need to be mentored. And it wasn't just for me. And we did everything over telephone. That's how I learned how to read master service agreements. So really think about what that looked like. Is it one mentor, one to many, or is it an individual mentor for a few people? So you can test out the different structures, and you don't have to do one or the other. You can do one to few, one mentor to maybe like 3 mentees, and then do maybe 3 one-on-ones and see what that looks like for you. So test out a few models, especially if you're stretched thin to have mentors, and be creative on where you can find mentors as well. Partnerships with other organizations, professional organizations may be a good way to do it, but retirees really like to get out and talk to people because they bored out their mind. If you know any civil engineers that are in their 70s and still working, you know exactly what I mean. So that's one way to do it. And so just DM me with more information about the type of, not organization, but more about the demographics of the mentees that you would like to at least do a test pilot with. And I'll send you a couple resources. So I want to recap very quickly. Yeah, insurance, the US, not the best. That's all I'm going to say. I'm just keep it like that. So we're talking about the glass cliff, which is often described as a phenomenon that where underrepresented individuals and women are often provided leadership roles during challenging or risky times. So pandemic is one, a recession, organization may have had some bad PR, financially struggling, and they're offered this leadership position. And the reason they're offered this leadership position because white men are like, no, this is a difficult time to be in a leadership role. I decline. And so they're looking for somebody that will take on these risky opportunities. And that's where they find women and BIPOC or Black, Indigenous, and other people of color will often pick these roles. All right. Then on top of that, once we look at the glass cliff, how do we change it wherein it's not sending people, marginalized people out of the organization, and really building a bridge and really focus on building a sustainable and inclusive environment that is supportive of underrepresented individuals when they're in leadership roles? And what does that look like? And that could still be sponsorship, that could be partnerships, that could be communicating effectively across the board. But it involves implementing various measures to really address systemic barriers that lead to marginalized people failure in leadership roles. And so first I talked about tokenism and leadership positions, then lack of access to networks and opportunities. And then finally, we talked about lack of professional development opportunities. All of these play huge barriers when it comes to bridging the gap or bridging from a glass cliff role to actually a sustainable DEI culture within an organization. So think about those things. That is what I have for this week. In a month, we will be kicking off our Building Sustainable Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Engineering and Construction virtual summit. I will drop the link in the chat. I would love for you to join us. It's free. I'm stuttering saying that. I know I keep stuttering on saying that. But if you're looking for places to go and other people in this industry to talk to about what is going on in DEI, what is going on in what needs to be changed around this industry, engineering, construction, or AEC, a lot of what is going to come in the next few short 4 years, because what we have 4 years before we're going to need 600,000 engineers and 2.3 skilled laborers. Organizations that are focused on DEI are more likely to be able to make it through that labor shortage. And I say that you cannot make enough people and you cannot create enough licensed engineers to do this work. And I kid you not. And so we literally only have less than 5 years, we have less than 4 years at this point to really make this work, because the US infrastructure is in dire need to being rebuilt, redesigned for climate change, and how to operate it and maintain it. We don't know what the hell we're going to have to do. We really have to figure that out. And it's going to take having not just enough people, the right people with the right skill set to do it. And DEI is going to be a driving force to make that happen. As a civil engineer that has been on the ground building a grid, where we literally had a room full of skilled laborers that had less than 5 years of experience. And this was in transmission distribution, substation construction, as well as transmission line construction. It's going to get worse before it gets better if more organizations are not stepping into DEI in this industry at a faster pace, but also at a pace to make it sustainable as climate change becomes worse. So that is what I have for this week. We'll be back next week with a phenomenal speaker. I'm really excited to have with us Jessica Bantam. Jessica is actually an interior designer who focuses on equitable and inclusive design. So she comes from like the AEC side. You know, I was outside, like everything was engineer driven. She's on the architecture driven side, the AEC side. So come join us as we talk about what it looks like when you have equity, when you're activating diversity, equity, inclusion, and you're pioneering change in interior design. So I will drop that link in the chat as well if you want to join us for that. because I love talking to Jessica. She has a great book about this exact subject. And I'm excited. I'm really excited to share what Jessica is doing in this space, in this industry, and really, I don't know. I think it's a different take, and a lot of people aren't looking at design the way she does around DEI. So I've dropped that in the chat. So come over, join us, everybody. You're very welcome. And I will see y'all next week, same time, same place. Bye, everybody. If this posts, then I can leave. Okay, cool.